Hi, everybody. It's Craig. Welcome to Cutting the Crap with Shap. I am here with the amazing Michelle Gill. She is the owner of Believe Learning. Uh, we're going to have a fantastic time. So, I have been blessed to know Michelle for the past 3 years. We work together in Centennial School District. I'm at William Tennant High School. Michelle was the social emotional learning coordinator for the district and somebody that I really feel blessed to have gotten to know. She is an incredible person. And I don't say that lightly. And I'm not saying it because she's actually on. I'm saying it because she really is. We spent a lot of time together, just working together and just talking about education, how to make the world a better place. And before I give her a chance to introduce herself, I'll just say that I came away from the hundreds of conversations feeling that Michelle is the kind of person who could talk to anybody about anything in a way that they would never feel threatened. So um, that's not up to debate. That's my opinion of things. So again, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Cutting the Crap with Shap. Please hop on Spotify if you prefer to do that. It's all about building a community, and I'm grateful for the people that have gotten involved. Doing this forum has been an amazing experience. So, without out of the way, hi, Michelle.
Correct. Thank you for having me and thank you for that kind introduction. I appreciate it. I'm
Of,
happy to be here.
of course. First thing, if I had to say to you, tell me one word to describe you, what would it be?
Curious.
Okay. Okay. That was kind of something that I had written down. So, why do you say you're curious?
So it's just an innate quality I've always had, which is sometimes met with uh, welcome, and then sometimes depending on where you're at, especially when you're a little kid and maybe in a educational setting that isn't really fostering that, you could sometimes be made to feel like it's a nuisance. But I love learning about people, systems, processes, especially things that are outside of my like my everyday or my lens or my world. When I see something or someone or encounter someone that's got something very different going on, I I get really curious. And then if I don't, if I find myself like, ooh, you're getting a little like defensive, or you're getting a little like, is that judgment? Then I get curious about that for myself. So it's just a natural tendency I have, and I think it fosters a lot of connections, which I'm very grateful for, like human to human connection.
I also think that's something you're very good at too.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. I
you,
appreciate that.
you,
You as
you're,
well.
what's that?
You as well.
Oh, thanks.
Hmm.
I found that. Um, do you find that that people feel very comfortable talking to you?
I think so, especially when there's a an under like a level of authenticity that's able to be present. I think there's an easy flow there often. I think so.
I definitely sense that because I remember the first time we met. I was you had just become the SEL coordinator, and we met about the position, the SEL liaison. And I just remember walking away, and I'm like, man, that's a really good person right there. Like somebody very easy to talk to.
Thank
Um,
you. I appreciate that.
oh, it's so true. So I guess one of the things I want to talk about, and we're going to be so people that are watching and listening. Michelle and I had over 3 years. I would probably say well over 50 conversations of a variety of topics. Now, both of us, Michelle is an expert, and I'm saying expert, I mean an expert in social emotional learning, has an incredible wealth of knowledge, information that hopefully we're going to touch on today in ways that are positive. And one of the things that I want to make sure we get it right out of the gate is you talked about like this SEL myth busting, which I want to bring that up now because I know we're going to be talking about other topics and I don't want to forget about it. So, what does that mean to you?
SEL has become a buzzword, just like many other educational buzzwords. It's also become almost like an industry. well, not almost. I think there's a robust industry related to it, both private companies and, higher ed and research. And whenever that happens, there's a lot of money directed towards something and a lot of attention directed towards something. And whenever that happens, we'll have proponents for something like SEL or whatever the big term is. And then we're going to have people that start to get a little dubious about it because of all the attention and money and things directed at it. And then misinformation starts to get layered on. And that's definitely what happened with social and emotional learning. You and I have talked so many times
Yes.
about how this is not a new thing. This is how you've shared about early in your teaching career that this is like you always were kind of a natural with embedding social, emotional, and relational practices into your teaching and work with students and your coaching. I felt similar, but we didn't know the term until a little later when it became a term. And then, maybe that term got unpacked more and clarified more. And then there's subsets of social emotional learning. So probably slowly over the last decade, but certainly over the last 5 years, there were sometimes deliberate and sometimes unintentional misinformation that was contributed to what social emotional learning is. And we started to see a politicization of the idea of social and emotional learning, confusion of it with things like critical race theory and indoctrination, fear of it because it is sometimes misunderstood, and it is an acronym all the time too, SEL. So we throw it around and we use it with each other really comfortably. And then maybe when we're talking to people who don't know as much, I always say, like, anytime we start using a lot of jargon and acronyms, we can other people really quickly who are not part of like the know. And so unintentionally, we sometimes started to do things like that to families and community members. And so when those other ideologies or political beliefs got loaded into SEL, which is not what SEL is, there started to be a lot of backlash and a lot of people being very angry that schools were using programs they thought to be associated with things that were not aligned with their local policies. And so I think it's really important to clear all that noise and talk about, like, what is it actually, and also to connect. And this is where curiosity comes back around, because when there's mistrust and misinformation and things like that, myth busting is about like connecting with people and getting curious about why there's a fear or why there's a defensiveness, rather than just separating from each other and going into our separate camps. And we talk about what we believe and we all agree on. You talk about what you believe and agree on, and we don't talk anymore. That's going to make all of this worse. It's going to increase the fear and the mistrust and the misinformation. And so, myth busting can be a way that we can clarify things, come together, and find some common ground around what we all believe is best for teaching and learning.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I think again, like you and I talked about this a lot, and I'd get very frustrated because I would say, like, I don't understand why we're making this stuff so darn complex.
Right.
Like, I don't understand it. Like, okay, it's okay to put a term on it. I mean, I like the term. I love the term SEL. I love that term. I think it's a very inclusive term for education. I would say not just education, our world. I mean, think about it. If social emotional learning, like that term is inclusive of so many things. And I sometimes feel like, well, like the myth busting to me is kind of like, this is something that's good teaching. Okay. Like if you want it, that to me, when somebody says, oh, it's this newfangled thing, that's a myth. It's not a newfangled thing. It's been around since for hundreds of years. It's just effective teaching. Now, again, it goes much more broad than that. There's lots of effective teaching, but I always think about, and we've talked about this, is like if you walk into a classroom where there's a certain amount of authenticity and of student voice and teacher voice that gives people a way to be heard, would you say that's SEL? So like if
Absolutely.
you
It
yeah,
also, and then also falls into, like you just said, other frameworks for good teaching and learning. They all have that in common. And it is certainly a component of social and emotional learning.
If I had to ask you, like, if you had to do a short description for people on what you think SEL is, what would you say?
Social emotional learning is the process that we all go through to learn the skills we need to like be aware of and manage our emotions, the skills we need to learn to become aware of others and manage our relationships, and how we use all of that in service of responsible decision making. So it's this process we go through throughout our lives. It's never fully mastered. It's something that continues to evolve over time. So it's the learning of a set of skills that contribute to that. There's also like another pathway into that definition that is in school. It's how we teach and learn. And so there's this learning of skills, and then it's also like the learning environment we create where those skills can be taught and where those skills can develop. So, positive learning environment, trust, safety, predictability, and the processes that we use to teach.
It's so interesting the way you frame that. And as I was listening, I was just thinking to myself, like, okay, so let's see. Let's think about it. A space that's trusting. Okay, that makes sense. A space where there's a voice without judgment. That makes sense. Those things, to me, when I hear them, they just seem to be what any space should be like anyway. I mean, think about our space. You and I are just talking. Like,
Right.
there's no judgment. We're just having a conversation, just talking about stuff.
Right.
I mean, if I disagree with you, I sure am not judging you. I might just disagree with you, and vice versa. I think that's one of the things where the way you frame the what SEL is, I think, a set of processes. That can be confusing to people. Like, once you get into that, people kind of say like, "Ooh, what's that?" When really, it's not really that deep. Now, how you get there, I think, is the bigger picture. I think that's something that, how do we help people to develop those skill sets to make their class or their school much more SEL based? I guess that's my question.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's tricky because I'm going to answer that question, but it goes back to what you just said of like it's simple, it's not that deep or complicated. But at the same time, to get a whole school full of people to have a similar shared vision and to like row in the same direction toward it, that is complicated, especially if we can be very authentic here or very transparent. Or we are like a single school, sure, but especially a single public school in the United States, is part of a very large public school system with mandates and policies and procedures. Um, it's a systemic thing where there's a lot going on. So I understand what you're saying, where you're like, it's not that deep. It's not that. I'm like, but it is. We've got hundreds of people in one school, part of a system that, for better or worse, is there and has an impact on the way people behave. The beliefs everybody brings in, like, this is complicated. So anyway, but what I was going to share about that is, I think first and foremost, it's about defining, as a school community, what do we all believe? What do we want for ourselves as members of the community and for our students? What's our vision? What are our values? How are we going to work together to achieve that? And making sure that that touches on not just the academic, but the social and emotional well-being of the people in the community. So we've got to start there with a shared vision and then backwards plan. Like, how do we get there? Without that, everybody's just in their own orbit. So I think that's the beginning of a deeper process.
And it's interesting, Michelle, that you said, because I'm sorry, I was taking notes. That's what I normally do, because you're just saying stuff that I know if I don't write them down, I'm not going to remember it. And you kind of said a shared vision, transparency, policies, systems. And what my answer to that is, while I agree with everything you said, this is how I would push back and how I have pushed back many times. So if you're a parent, well, you are a parent, and if I said, and I'm the administrator saying, hey, Mrs. Gill, hi, have your kids, Do you want the school to be a place where your kids feel safe, accepted, welcome, can speak their voice in a non-judgmental way, where they feel connected to the school community, where they feel validated for their own strengths? Would you say yes to that?
Absolutely.
Who wouldn't?
But that has to be clarified. We can't just assume everyone thinks that.
But
That's the thing. Like we
really?
have to say,
So if I said that to 100 people with kids, there's 100 people in the audience, and I said to everybody here, "Hey, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. We just want to share a couple things. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. One, do you want your children to feel safe, accepted, and valued?" Who's saying no?
no, that's not what I, hopefully nobody. But that's not what I mean. I mean, in order to get to that, there's things we have to agree to do together. Families, students, faculty, staff, and leadership. So we can all easily say that is a vision we want to have and we agree with. But what are we doing day to day? And most especially, we are not perfect. Nobody's perfect. So I'm going to have a day where I didn't get good sleep. I had a tough meeting in the morning. I show up in a class. I feel, whatever it is, and I'm not as regulated. Maybe I have an observation and somebody sees this. And now we have a debrief where we're feeling a little bit defensive and I'm feeling judged. And so in those moments, it can be really easy to forget about the fact that our greater vision is a school where students can achieve greatness, can feel heard, seen, and valued, as well as the faculty. And so these little things, if that conversation full of defensiveness and dysregulation goes awry, it's these little teeny things that can erode that vision really quickly. If we aren't able to say to each other, hey, before we go any further, I can tell there's a lot coming up right now. I just want to bring us back to the place where we're all working towards the same thing, where we feel a sense of value and safety. And then move forward with whether we need to have a different conversation in that moment, reschedule the conversation. Because if we don't clarify that we're all working towards it and then hold ourselves and each other accountable, that's the hard part. It's so easy to say what we want. It's the doing it every day as humans that are messy. That's hard. Vision's easy, living it challenging.
So good. So good. Doing
And by the
over.
way, we should be involving families and students in creating that vision. If we as a adult faculty are just there making all these decisions, even though it's something we know, you ask 100 parents, they're going to agree with us. Probably they should be there in some way to share in the creation of this vision for the way that, students will feel a sense of social emotional well-being, especially at the high school level. High school voice and representation, anytime we're talking about a vision we want or the way we're going to teach and learn, it should not just be a room full of the teachers.
You got so many things to unpack. I took notes. I can't even keep track of them all. Yeah, I mean, you have so many things here. Like, what are we doing each day? And that's something you and I've talked about. It's something I don't mind saying. Like, I struggle with this deeply because my inherent personality is one of I'm going to come in each day and I'm going to do my best, and I'm not going to let one small thing get to me. But I also realize that that's really hard for people. It's really hard for whatever reason to kind of like put that to the side and kind of remember like why you're here. But I
Absolutely.
but I also say, and I would say this to like the educators, one of the things that I struggle with is if somebody said to you, your school, your classroom is a place where you want learning to be valued. You want your voice to be heard. You want students' voices to be heard. You want it to be safe and accepting and a place where students want to be. You want it to be a place where their parents are proud to send their children. I don't know anybody who'd say no to that. And this kind of goes back to what you were saying. Yes, it's easy to say that, but what does it look like? And that also is where I think I really struggle because I know what it looks like.
Hmm.
I mean, I think,
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm not going to say I think I know what it looks like. I know what it
You
looks
know what
like.
it looks like for you.
Okay, fair. Okay, so I know where you're
Yeah.
going. Okay, so I'll say that. Okay, so I know what it looks like for me. Okay, it looks like for me where we do not judge each other, where we are accepting of each other's opinions, where we create a space where students feel safe, where learning is fun, interesting, high expectations. Um, that doesn't seem to me to be something that would be different than what any other teacher would say. Now, I could be wrong.
Yeah. But okay. And then to add on to that, so yes, and what happens if I'm in a meeting with people with different levels of leadership roles, or even on a team meeting, and there is judgment happening, or I'm feeling judgment coming up? Because we can set the ideals you said, and as a community, what do we do? What do we agree we will do so that when inevitably as a human, I start to sense that I'm judging, whatever's happening, or there's literal vocal judgment happening? What do we do in a meeting when that's happening? Do we pretend it's not happening? Are we allowed, do we agree as a community to say, hey, I'm sensing some judgment coming up? We talk about how as a community, we're going to try really hard not to judge one another because we want this to be a safe space. Is anyone else picking up on that? If that doesn't get set out ahead of time, not everybody's going to feel safe to do it. And then you said judgment free, a safe place. What do I do if I walk into a classroom and it does, as an administrator, and it doesn't feel safe? Like, we can say we want it to be safe, or what do we do if I walk into a building as a faculty member and the building doesn't feel safe to me? So
Well,
we say it, but what do we do when it's not happening? That's when we get to do the hard work. We have to kind of, so.
and I think that and in my experience, um, I have 36 years of teaching. In my experience, you are so spot on because it's easy to talk about it and hard to do it.
Yes.
And also, if you want a school or district that is a high functioning, that's a key term, high functioning. When I say high functioning, I didn't say academically successful because I don't even know what the heck that means. High functioning schools are able to have tough conversations.
Yep.
They are able to address people's needs in a way that is not attacking, but helpful. And that
Right.
doesn't happen if you're unwilling to be able to tell something they don't want to hear.
And it also doesn't happen if everyone in the community hasn't set an agreement that this is how we're going to approach these things when they happen. We talk about social emotional learning for students to develop the skills they need to manage relationships. But most of us who are teaching right now grew up at a time where social and emotional learning, or emotional intelligence, or emotional well-being and social well-being was not a part of school. It wasn't necessarily something that was taught explicitly in any way. So now you've got all of us running classrooms and schools where we're supposed to be helping the students with their social emotional learning, yet we may not have an effective use of all of those skills and processes ourselves. So there needs to be a focus on and a shared agreement that as an adult community, if we value this for our students, we need to have a shared focus on it for ourselves. How are we developing effective conflict resolution? How are we developing effective interpersonal communication skills? And literally intentionally building those and reflecting on how we're doing with it as adults. Those are usually the communities you're talking about, the highly effective schools, highly effective organizations, where it's characterized by a very strong sense of social and emotional intelligence among the adults. And that doesn't mean they all walk in the door that way, like originally. They grow that together.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder how we do that. I think I guess that's the bigger question, is how do we do that? And I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, social and emotional intelligence, which is those are the skills we're trying to grow through social emotional learning. We're talking about starting with, students and helping them to understand their social emotional skills. In our district where we worked together, one way we did that was K-8 through a helping students with a program that we used that helps to teach evidence-based ways to help to teach those skills, but also through the way we set up working towards trusting learning environments. For adults, something that I'm passionate about and I'm able to offer in the work that I do now is social emotional intelligence coaching for individuals and teams. It's not therapy, but it is directly tied to these emotional skills that we all show up with to some degree, some strengths, some not strengths. And when we have leaders or teams or individuals on teams who are willing to say, hey, we all have areas of social emotional intelligence that can be developed, one of the most efficient ways to develop them is through coaching.
What's that look like?
So the approach that we use is rooted in the work of the social emotional intelligence, the Institute for Social Emotional Intelligence. So what we start with is building a sense of connection between the person who's having engaging in the coaching and the coach. So let's say it's you're engaging in coaching and I'm the coach. So we would start off building rapport, just like to be best practices, right? So getting to know each other, talking about, let's make sure we both have an agreement on what this coaching is going to be. What are we hoping the outcomes are? Finding out a little bit more about one another, and then deciding, do we want to go forward with this? Does this feel like a good match? The next step is to complete a social emotional intelligence profile. And so this is broken into, so I would sit down at my computer or you would, as the person being coached, and you would answer a series of questions that help to, that each one is connected to a different competency. So self-awareness. So that's going to have things like emotional awareness as part of it. Self-management, things like, my ability to manage big emotions that come up in the moment at work. And this is you can do it based on personal, like you can take an assessment that's more about my personal, or you can take a workplace version, which is what I tend to work with people on the most. Then some of the questions are going to focus on relationship management. Notice how I didn't say person management. We can't manage and control other people.
Right.
We can only manage how we show up in our relationships. And then also awareness of others. So there's questions we answer. That assessment can take anywhere from like 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how long the person takes to read through each one. And then what ends up happening is a profile is formed around, at that point in time, we look at 26 competencies that are in those 4 areas I named. And then we start to look for patterns and trends. Like, one we might see is someone who has really, really like superpowers in building empathy.
Which you
Or
do.
having a sense of having a sense of empathy and building trust. So those are things that we can kind of parcel out through this data, but maybe they're really an area that is showing up as the opposite of that. So almost like a big area for growth would be like stress management or coaching others. So what happens if you have a leader who is really high empathy, but really low stress management? Let's take a minute and think about that for themselves.
Oh,
What might happen to
they
them?
got so much stress.
Because they're taking everything in.
Yeah.
Or let's look at a common one that often comes up when I'm working with school leaders, someone who's really high achievement drive, but maybe lower in interpersonal communication. What's going to their leadership skills with achievement driver, that's a superpower for them. And so they're getting lots of forward momentum in their career through that. But as they're leading people, if they've got low trust building or lower interpersonal communication, people are starting to fall off, right? And so what we can do is then decide as a partnership, where do you want to focus? Which of these do you think would contribute to you as a person feeling more successful or reaching your goals? And then we work on tools from there. We check in every so often over a period of months on how those things are going. And so I know that was a little bit more of an involved answer, but I'm really glad you asked, because I don't think many people understand what that coaching process might look like. And so getting an opportunity to share that is really helpful. And it's also really helpful when the person's coming willingly to coaching as opposed to being sent to coaching.
I was going to say that the things that you talked about, I think are very important, because I think about leadership, right? Like being a leader. And I believe anybody can be a leader, first of all. So whatever that means. I often think, like, if you are a leader in a school or a teacher, whatever, it doesn't matter, you don't have to be, whatever it is. If you think about certain skills that are really important, like high expectations. High expectations does not mean to lack empathy. Like they're not, they go together.
They can, yeah.
Well, they should go together. They should.
Ideally.
They
Yes.
should,
Yes, ideally.
because what happens is, and I think about this a lot, as an educator for many, many years, I often think that if I am hoping that students are going to excel in class academically, one of the ways that I'm going to help them do that is by building an incredible social connection network where they feel, again, I don't want to belabor the same words, but they are the same words. It's not about a student going home and studying and getting an A on a test. It's not what it is. To me, and a very successful school is not solely about looking at their academic achievement. Is that part of it? Of course. Of course it is. It has to be. But that's not all it is, because what happens in my experience is you can have a school where students are doing well academically but have a toxic workspace. They can be mutually exclusive of each other because for a variety of reasons. And you talk about leadership being, let's say, building that academic success. If you are a leader and you do not have the trust of your faculty, you can still have a high functioning academic school, but for a variety of reasons. You could have parents that are very supportive of their kids. You could have a very good
Students who are going to be learning despite what we do.
exactly.
That's not always the case. You're going to have
Exactly.
a much more robust and thriving academic community with the presence of strong connection, strong belonging. Yeah.
Well, that's the questioning piece. Like I mean, you've been in my classroom, you see how I teach, so you know that anyway. But I'll always say to students that the sole purpose of you being here is for you not to get an A on a test. If that is the byproduct of solid relationships, you listening, you asking questions, me being clear with the expectations of class, and then the byproduct is of you getting an A, awesome. We'll take it. That's what we want. But if I am not building trust and empathy and connections and a feeling of being welcome, and you still are getting that A, you're getting the A in spite of me, not
Absolutely.
because of me. And I think that's kind of where I see the issue.
Yeah, it is, because then the data that we're looking at, which, academic outcomes and achievement are going to be one of the most, looked at data in the education world. Then the data is leading us, it's telling a different story than maybe the truth. Right. And which is why, so achievement data, outcome data, it is one indicator, but it is also why it's important to have other that we're looking at other data sources, that we're looking at qualitative data from a climate and culture survey, that we're looking at maybe impromptu conversations that or focus group data, where groups of students are telling us about their experiences so that we can understand better beyond just most of the students in this class are getting A's, so I guess everything's fine.
Well, it's easy to think like that. It's easy to think like
It is,
that.
it is, but we have to challenge ourselves to look for additional data points. And then as leaders, looking at additional, so if I'm working in a district where there's lots of growth, or maybe there's lots of achievement, but not a lot of growth either way, and I could just kind of rest there. So
Well,
leaders saying, hey, what blind spots might I have? Should we just be done? What blind spots might we have about other things that could contribute to additional growth? Or let's start parsing out the subgroups. Maybe there's things hiding in this data that we're not seeing if we're just looking at it as a whole. Maybe we start to look at different, underrepresented groups or minority groups. Are they achieving at the same rate? Are they growing at the same rate? We got to get there. We go back to curiosity. Let's get curious about the data instead of defensive or instead of complacent.
everybody's a lot to unpack here. And Michelle and I have covered a lot of stuff. I want to kind of ask you, so one of the things that I saw that you had written down is this idea of getting people to feel validated and also questioning their practices and habits. What does that look like to you?
That's balance. It's so interesting. It made me think of, right when you said it, it made me think of that balance between empathy and high expectations. And it's like this, it's ideally both of those are there, empathy and high expectations, but it can be difficult for people to get there. It's the same with the two things you just brought up. So helping to teams to feel, or adults in a workplace to feel validated for what they're doing, but also what term did you use? Curious about
You talked about questioning practices and habits and feeling validated.
Yeah. Yeah, like how do we do those things together? How do we do those things hand in hand? That's a great question. Um, Ways that I've seen or experienced this have to do with first making sure that we have a community where people feel like they can answer the questions, do you see me, and like, am I enough? And so if I can starting off originally by being like, I see you, I hear you, I'm glad you're here. That's the other question. Do you see me? Are you glad I'm here? Like, that sounds so trite for like a workplace, but it's an important piece. And so if we can build a community where people feel seen, I know their name, I ask them questions, they know they can trust that I have pretty consistent responses to things. I'm building trust, I'm building a sense of affiliation, and I'm starting to give feedback on practices I see that are going well. So even if I walk into a space where there is a lot that can be improved on, I'm looking for something that's working, that's aligned with maybe the vision of this place that I'm in. And so I'm leaving feedback about that. I'm letting them know I see them and I see the value. I see your expertise. It's by being present. So I'm not on my phone when I'm walking around. I'm looking at you. If I have to be on my phone, I'm stepping aside, but I'm giving you that like human, I'm connecting. Once we've done that, then we want to be really clear about part of my role. Like if we're having a conversation in an organization, part of my role is helping to make sure that everyone here feels a sense of belonging and a sense of value. Let me check in on how you're doing with that. The other part of my role is also helping us to all see, including myself, areas that I might be able to improve. Because when we do that, we continue to work towards our mission of X, Y, and Z. So let's start talking about that now. So I've been deliberate and intentional about building a sense of trust and value. I've been clear in my role and in your role in this organization and how it relates to our vision and mission. And now we're going to do that work. You don't start by doing that work and being like, you're not doing this right, because like, who are you? What?
Right.
So,
Well, that's interesting because I was just going to say that whenever I'm mentoring people and let's say getting to know them and I'm, let's say, watching something, let's say I'm watching a lesson or something, my first question to them is, wow, thank you so much for letting me be here. Can you tell me something that went well? Not,
absolutely.
but I'm always stunned when I don't see that. Like when I say to
Right.
myself, like, as a leader, like you're not self-aware enough to say you just watch this person who's probably nervous, who might be scared, and you didn't ask them what went well. You
Yeah.
like
Uh, Craig, this goes back to if we can zoom. So that's like a macro like habit thing you just talked about. Let's zoom out. No, that's micro. I always do that. I switch them. It's micro. Let's zoom out on the macro level. Let's say we work in an organization or I'm in a classroom or a school or district, whatever it is, where we believe that, everyone should feel a sense of value. We all work towards growth and achievement, respect, empathy. So we can all agree to that easily. One of the macro habits is that in our organization, feedback looks like this. We start by
yes,
building this trust. We do that before we have any sort of, so if I'm, like you said, when you're coaching people, so the coach's team agrees that in order to be aligned with those values, we build trust. We ask at the forefront of every coaching conversation, how are you? What's new? And then we say, what do you think went well with that lesson? Here's what I saw that went well. And then we start talking about areas like everyone's doing that. We agree to that because that helps. That's one habit that helps us live into that vision we easily said we agree with. Like just to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning.
it's interesting too what you say that because I think to myself that seems, and I've said this to you so many times, I probably drive you crazy when I say it, is I can't really understand why somebody wouldn't do that. Like I really do struggle, and that's definitely a weakness of mine because
Okay. Yeah.
I can't really understand like why if you are sitting there and let's say it doesn't even have to be observing. in a meeting or something like that, let's say we're doing professional learning together. My first question to anybody, hey everybody, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for being here. How is everybody doing? Why wouldn't you do that? Like that just seems so, I don't even want to say common sense because I use that all the time. I don't want to say that term. I will say it seems just like good practice.
I know.
Because
Yeah, that makes
if you want
go.
people to feel comfortable, so if I'm asking you to open up, but I haven't made you feel comfortable enough or safe, you're just going to give me some BS to make me feel good or just to move on or say, this was a waste of time. Instead of kind of, and I took this notes here, and I think this is really critical for people. Do you see me? Incredibly important. And when you say do you see me, you don't mean like do I
As
see
in,
you? You mean do you see me as a person? Yes?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Do you see me? Am I enough? That second one, I circled am I enough? It might even be the title of our session together. Because that is one where after working with you for 3 years, of course I think you're enough. Of course I've worked with you. You're definitely enough. You do so many amazing things. I didn't say perfect. I said enough. And that's where I think people struggle deeply. And we haven't touched on this, but I think it's something we should touch on is if you said to me, Craig, these are some things you might want to consider. If I do not trust you or do not believe in your knowledge base, then I can take that as judgment.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, if I know that your intentions are good and I know that you see me for who I am, then I am much more apt to take what you're saying and say, you know what? Wow, Michelle touched on some things that I didn't really think about. Maybe I want to work on that.
Yes. It's the empathy and high expectations.
Yeah.
I can accept you. We want to see each other and accept each other as who we are. Be glad that we're in this community together as much as possible, and hold each other to high expectations and a sense of professional accountability in a way that's not threatening.
Oh, I want to write that down. You just said
Yeah,
something. So like it's like that professional accountability. But I think like what does that even mean though?
right. And as a community, have we defined that? Do we all understand how that plays into our mission and vision, and how the values that we have, the shared values, align with that? That
And
has to be defined.
I tell you
You
what
know.
now, like we're gonna have to do a part two podcast because the professional accountability, I think before we move on, I think is incredibly difficult for people because as professionals, as educators, leaders who have gone to school, have gotten an education, we often think about professional accountability as being something different. So for somebody, professional accountability could mean they come in, they make their lesson, they make their objectives and standards, they deliver
Right.
that content, and it's up to students to succeed. They are professional, they believe that they are professionally accountable. Somebody else might think of professional accountability in a totally different light. Like I can say
Yes.
to everybody, professionally, for me to be a professionally accountable, I see myself as, well, I can easily say it. For me to be a professionally accountable to myself, my students need to feel safe in my class. They need to feel accepted in my class. They need to feel that they have a voice in my class. They need to feel that they can question some of the things I'm saying without judgment. They need to feel that I'm going to give them multiple opportunities to learn and be successful. That is what I consider my professional accountability. Not
Interesting. Yeah. I didn't mean to
so,
cut you off. Go ahead.
no. You didn't. I'm just thinking like that piece that you just touched on. I think we're going to have to do a part two and we'll have to call it
Yeah.
professional accountability because that term goes back to the overarching norms and visions of your school.
It does. And it also goes back to, so what you just shared was really illuminating, because what I understand from that is there's an organization's definition of a professional accountability. There might be individual definitions. And then we're talking about accountable to whom. And yeah, it's something that needs to be unpacked and clearly defined, and possibly have multiple lenses when we're looking at it, most likely. And I just want to add to that in a high functioning organization, high trust, high achievement, all of that. And I've lived this. And so I can say this from experience. It is a gift to be held accountable. To know that I will be held accountable is not a threat. It's actually a gift. I trust the people leading me enough to know that they have, that we're all working towards the same thing, and that if needed, they'll hold me accountable. And I think that's where we would need to unpack what I mean by that. That's actually it's a gift, not in the way that a lot of people experience it.
You said it's a gift to be held accountable, right?
That's going to sound like I'm a masochist or a sadist. That's not what I'm talking about. It's when it's done well, I know that people are going to make sure I am the best version of myself.
Yeah.
Like you get that from coaching and stuff, right?
You should.
Like that's what I'm talking about. But the way that so many of us experience it is compliance based, and it is painful.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's something for another podcast. I think what I struggle with there is, and this goes back to what I was going to ask you. It's very simple. Okay. I've done this before with other people. Scale of 1 to 10. You ready?
Are you going to ask me this? Are we recording? Oh, we're already recording. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
I just wanted to make sure. I was like, wait. Okay.
Scale 1 to 10. How confident are you in yourself?
7.
7. Okay. Now, if you're a 7 and you're talking about a gift to be held accountable, if you're a 7, but you do not trust these people, you do not feel welcome, sometimes your experience hasn't been the best, are you going to feel it's a gift to be held accountable if you're a 7?
No.
No way. No way. And what if you're not a 7? What if you're like a 3?
Yeah, and also, Craig, I could be a 7 today because of like what we're talking about. But if I was like teaching, like the other day, I was engaged in a collaborative math activity with other teachers at a training I was at, and I walked up to that group like a 4
Right.
because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to be able to contribute to this. So that can shift and vary depending on what's going on and many circumstances.
Right.
But yes, yeah, I think it's.
I mean, I don't want to belabor, because we're going to, everybody listening, we're going to do that in a part 2, because otherwise it'll take up the entire podcast talking about being accountable. But I do think, again, though, that goes back to the whole overarching vision we've talked about so much for this past 50 minutes is just, what are the norms and values and vision of the school? What do they look like? What do they feel like? What do people believe? And beyond that, how do you put them into action?
That's the hard part.
It is
the important part.
But I also would say, think about every conversation we've had. Seriously, go take a second and think about how many conversations we've had. Mm-hmm. Have we ever had a toxic conversation with each other?
No.
We never have.
No.
Ever. And that is because of what reason?
Well, I think it's because of our level of trust and the fact that we approach some things in the same manner. So that doesn't mean we do everything the same, but I think that we approach like respect and things like that with a similar understanding.
So there's 3 things I'll say. You hit 2 of them. First of all, we trust each other. That's number 1. We trust each other. We trust each other because we know each other, that our intentions are solid. The second thing, which is, I was wondering if you would say it, is we respect each other. We have mutual trust. We have mutual respect. And the third thing I was going to say is we both have high expectations. Where I see the struggle is, you can have all the BS words and mission statements and things on a board that you want. If you do not have people who trust each other, who respect each other, and have high expectations for each other, somewhere along the line, things are going to break down. They might not break down initially, and you might have some great experiences. It is easy to be successful when everything is running smoothly, but very hard to be successful when things break down.
Right. Yeah. And we're all human. Stuff's going to go awry in a lot of different ways, especially if we're talking specifically about education. We're working with families, students, communities, board members, teachers. There's a lot of human stuff happening. And so, yeah, we have to be proactive in planning ahead for what we do to not only to avoid that happening a lot, but what will we do when that inevitably happens? That's an important part of the conversation. Yeah. And I do want to say, I want to remember to say this, is I didn't say it in the moment. When I talked about the idea of helping whatever organization that we're in, when we're working with other humans and we come to each other in these um, workspaces or school spaces saying like these questions that we don't speak out loud of, do you see me? Am I enough? Are you glad that I'm here? Those are not my words. Those are, I believe, Maya Angelou originally said them. And I came across them years ago through a book called Everyday SEL by Mina Servestin. I'm definitely mispronouncing her last name and I apologize. But those are those bids for connection that we have all the time, human to human. So I wanted to attribute that correctly.
Gotcha. So let's move on. I want to do a little personal stuff, okay? Because we've talked so
Great.
much about SEL. First of all, tell me some things that you're proud of.
I am, let's see, I'm proud of the relationships that I have with my husband and our children. I'm really proud of that. It's not perfect, but I feel like we keep those at the like we intentionally work on them and model that for one another. And it's really, really cool to see. And so there's definitely painful times and things like that. But when I look at the big picture, I'm really proud of that. Um, I'm also proud of the way that I have in different times and places when I've had leadership roles. I'm proud of the way that I've led with integrity and alignment to my core values and my professional values. It doesn't mean, going back to what you said, that what I did ever was perfect. That's never going to happen. There's things I would do differently in all of those spaces, but just looking at that, I'm proud of the approach to leadership that I take.
Anything else?
I'm sure there is. Oh, I'm proud that I started a business. I'm proud that I had a vision and a belief that was strong enough that I started a business and did a lot of learning outside my comfort zone over the last couple of years as I was building it, related to like finance stuff and marketing stuff and website stuff that like is not my passion, but part of owning a business and getting really curious about what I can bring to the emotional intelligence and SEL landscape. And I'm proud of that work.
You should be.
Thank you.
Tell me a couple challenges that you've overcome.
One of the first that comes to mind is I had a concussion in 2015 that was very derailing, and um, led to, I mean, I was out of work for 6 months because of the recovery and some of the things that came along with the concussion, and was not able to show up in the roles that I identify so strongly with in the way that I always had. So as a mother, a wife, a family member, a friend, and an educator, I was showing up in very different ways, and because of the injury. And I think the challenge that there was the physical recovery, but what I'll say was the biggest challenge that I had to overcome through that is that it brought vulnerability to the forefront of my life in a way that I had never experienced before. Vulnerability is really important. And as much as I believe that, it's also hard for me sometimes because I want to stay protected,
Of course.
like most of us
Sure.
as humans. And so for the first time as an adult, needed to be vulnerable and ask for help from people in my family, my friends, and my profession that I've never had to do before. I had no choice, and actually learned through that in being vulnerable, I had the deepest connections with people that I've ever had. And that's what happens when we're vulnerable. So that was a challenge that comes to mind. Did you ask for 2 challenges?
You can get what it give me one. If that's it, that's it. You don't have to.
That's it. Yeah, we can leave it. I feel like that's the one that came up first as the
Sure.
most important one in this moment.
And I think about, so I've lost both of my parents, and I've often told this story. So my dad has been gone for, I believe, about 26 years. And I remember when my father died. So we had all these people back at my house. And I remember going in my room. So we lived in a townhouse. And I remember we had all these people downstairs. We had all this food and all these people. It was kind of like a celebration of my dad's life. And I remember going upstairs and breaking down, just being really, really sad. And I remember crying in my room. And I will never forget this. Was crying in my room and somebody knocked on the door. And I couldn't really speak because I was, crying. I was emotional. And I remember it was one of my close friends, Rich, and he came in the room and he gave me a hug. And I remember feeling so vulnerable in that moment, but also feeling incredibly grateful that somebody there cared deeply enough about me to do that without any kind of intention. Like they weren't doing it because they wanted something, they were doing it because they just cared. And I think that feeling of vulnerability again goes back to what makes us better people and honestly how we treat each other. Like if you ever came to me and said, Craig, I need help with this, don't you think I'd help you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Of
Yeah.
course.
You
Of course.
have.
And of course I would, because I care enough about you to do that. I'm not looking for anything. Doing it because you want to make a difference in somebody's life. And that can be so hard for people. So hard for so many reasons. I don't want to get too deep into it,
Yeah.
but it just is.
Thank you for sharing that.
Of course. Let's do some kind of a closing message. Do you have something you'd like to close with?
I'd love to close really touching on some of the themes that we brought up today, or the one of the themes we brought up of just staying curious as much as possible, challenging ourselves to stay present and curious with our interactions with one another when we're taking in different media, and knowing and just being curious about what's coming up for us, and accepting that with compassion, and then going forth in those interactions. It's an important piece to avoid the protective shell and to allow there to be some vulnerability and to foster connection.
Love it.
Stay curious.
I love that. Stay curious. Everybody, first of all, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig. This was fantastic. I loved getting to talk with you.
Yeah, we had such an amazing conversation. Not shocking, of course, not even surprising. When we get off, just stay on for a sec, please. Everybody, first of all, Michelle was an amazing guest. There'll be a part 2 where we talk about some other things that we didn't touch on today, maybe delve a little bit deeper. Again, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd really appreciate that. If you'd like to be on the podcast, I have been overwhelmed with the feedback that I've gotten in the most positive of ways. Just the number of people I've had on, the number of people I'm going to be having on has been so humbling, and it's been a great experience. I want to thank Michelle again for being an amazing guest. And for those of you who don't know, please get in touch with her. Michelle, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Through the website, believelearning.org. So believelearning.org. There's a way to get in touch that's quick and easy for everybody.
Everybody, please do that. You're definitely missing out if you don't, because I'm not saying it because Michelle is here. I would say it if she wasn't here. She is an amazing leader. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that because I've worked with her for 3 years. So it's not because she's on the podcast. It's because she is. I've worked with her. She has an amazing amount of compassion, empathy, amazing listening skills. One of the best listeners I've ever met in my life. And I'm telling you right now, when you can find somebody who can listen, it's really important. What's our closing message?
What's our closing message?
Yeah, you said it before.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
That is our closing message, everybody. Hey, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.